novelty. My name is Mandy Rose Nichols. My pronouns are they, them. Tonight we are drinking tea from the Cat and the Kettle. It's Aries season and they make tea based on apparently which sector we're in. And so it's Aries and we're drinking Aries. So there you go. It's nice and got that lovely earth taste to it. I don't have any cream or sugar in it tonight because it kind of gums up the works when you're trying to tell stories. Elliot's joining me tonight. He's a little grumpy, so we'll see how well this lasts. Tonight we are reading from Grimm's Fairy Tales again. This one is Little Claus and Big Claus. And I think that sometimes we have gotten it into our heads of what fairy tales are, and lots of folks haven't read from the source material. So buckle up, my friends. I hope you have your tea. I hope you have your blanket. Here we go. Little Claus and Big Claus. In a village there lived two men who had the self-same name. Both were named Claus, but one of them owned 4 horses and the other only 1 horse. So distinguished between them, people called the man who had 4 horses Big Claus, and the man who only had 1 horse Little Claus. Now I'll tell you what happened to these two, for this is a true story. The whole week through, Little Claus had to plow for Big Claus and lend him his only horse. In return, Big Claus lent him all 4 of his horses, but only for 1 day, and that day had to be Sunday. Each Sunday, how proudly Little Claus cracked his whip all over the 5 horses, which were as good as his own on that day. How brightly the sun shone, how merry were the church bells that rang in the steeple, how well dressed all the people were who passed him with hymn books tucked under their arms. And they went on their way to church to hear the parson preach, and how people did stare at Little Claus plowing with all 5 horses. This made him feel so proud he would crack his whip and holla, "Get up all my horses!" "You must not say that," Big Claus told him. "You know as well as I do that only 1 of those horses is yours." But no sooner did the bevy of churchgoers come by than Little Claus forgot he mustn't say it and hollowed up, "Get up all my horses!" "Don't you say that again," Big Claus told him. "If you do, I'll knock your horse down dead in his traces, and that will be the end of him." "You won't catch me saying it again," Little Claus promised. But as soon as the people came by, nodding to him and wishing him good morning, he was so pleased and proud of how grand it looked to have 5 horses plowing his field, he hallooed again, "Get up all my horses!" "I'll get up your horse for you," Big Claus said. And he snatched up a teethering mallet, and he knocked down Little Claus's one and only horse on the head so hard that it fell down dead. "Now I haven't any horse at all," said Little Claus, and he began to cry. But by and by he skinned the dead horse and hung the hide to dry in the wind. Then he crammed the dry skin in a sack, slung it over his shoulder like a continental soldier, and set out to sell it in the nearest town. It was a long way to go. He had to pass through a dark, dismal forest. Suddenly, a terrible storm came up, and he lost his way. Before he could find it again, evening overtook him. The town was still a long way off, and he had come too far to get back home before night. Not far from the road, he saw a large farmhouse. The shutters were closed, but light showed through a crack at the top of the windows. "Maybe they'll let me spend the night there," Little Claus thought, as he went to the door and knocked. The farmer's wife opened it, but when she heard what he wanted, she told him to go away. She said her husband wasn't home and she wouldn't have any strangers in the house. "Then I'll have to sleep outside," Little Claus decided as the door slammed in his face. Near the farmhouse stood a large haystack, leading up to the thatched roof on a shed which lay between it and the house. "That's where I'll sleep," said Little Claus when he noticed the thatch. "It will make a wonderful bed. All I hope is that the stork doesn't fly down and bite my legs." For a stork was actually standing guard on the roof where it had a nest. Okay, I was like, is that a problem in Copenhagen? So Little Claus climbed to the roof of the shed. As he turned over to make himself comfortable, he discovered that the farmhouse shutters didn't come quite to the top of the windows, and he could see over them. He could see into a room with a big table spread with wine and roast meat and delicious fish. The farmer's wife and the sexton were sitting at the table all by themselves. She kept helping him to wine, and he kept helping himself to fish. He must have loved fish. Oh, if only I could have some too, thought little Klaus. By craning his neck toward the window, he caught sight of a great, appetizing cake. Why, they were feasting in there! Just then, he heard someone riding down the road to the house. It was the farmer coming home. He was an excellent man, except for just one thing. He could not stand the sight of a sexton. If he so much as caught a glimpse of one, he would fly into a furious rage, which was the reason why the sexton had gone to see the farmer's wife while her husband was away from home, and the good woman could do no less than set before him all the good things to eat she had in the house. When she heard the farmer coming, she trembled for the sexton, and begged him to creep into a big empty chest which stood in one corner of the room. He lost no time about it, because he knew full well that her poor husband couldn't stand the sight of him. The woman quickly set aside the wine and hid the good food in her oven, because if her husband had seen the feast, he would have asked questions hard to answer. Oh dear! Up on the shed little Klaus sighted to see all the good food disappearing. "Who's up there?" The farmer peered at little Klaus. "Whatever are you doing up there? Come into the house with me." So little Klaus came down. He told the farmer how he lost his way, and he asked if he could have shelter for the night. "Of course," said the farmer. "But first, let's have something to eat." The farmer's wife received them well, laid out the whole table, and set before them a big bowl of porridge. The farmer was hungry and ate it with a good appetite, but little Klaus was thinking about the good roast meat, the fish, and that cake in the oven. Besides, his feet under the table lay sack with the horsehide, for as we know, he was on his way to sell it in the town. Not liking the porridge at all, little Klaus trod on the sack and gave the heave, and the dry hide gave a loud squeak. "Shh!" little Klaus said to his sack. At the same time, he trod on it so hard that it squeaked even louder. "What on earth have you got in there?" said the farmer. "Oh, just a conjurer," said little Klaus. "He tells me when we don't have to eat porridge, because he has conjured up a whole full roast oven meat in the oven, fish, and cake for us." "What do you say?" said the farmer. He made haste to open the oven, where he found the good dishes. His wife had hidden them there, but he quite believed that they had been conjured up by the wizard in the sack. His wife didn't dare open her mouth as she helped them to fill their fill of meat, fish, and cake. Then little Klaus trod down on the sack to make it squeak again. "What does it say now?" asked the farmer. "He says that there are 3 bottles of wine for us in the corner by the oven." So the woman had to bring out the wine that she had hidden. The farmer drank it till he grew merry. That's drunk. And wanted to get himself a conjurer, just like the one little Klaus carried around in his sack. Can he conjure up the devil?" the farmer wondered. "I'm just in the mood to meet him." "Oh, yes," said little Klaus. "My conjurer can do anything I tell him, can't you?" And he trod upon the sack until it squeaked. "Did you hear him answer? He said yes, he can conjure up the devil, but he's afraid you won't like the look of him." "Oh, I'm not afraid. What's he like?" "Well, he looks an awful lot like a sexton." "Oh," said the farmer, "as ugly as that? I can't bear the sight of a sexton, but don't let that stop us. Now, I know that it's just the devil. I shan't mind it so much. I'll face him, provided he doesn't come near me." "Well, wait a minute while I talk to my conjurer." Little Klaus trod on the sack and stooped down to listen. "What does he say?" "He says for you to go and open that big chest in the corner, and there you'll find the devil doubled up inside of it. But you must hold fast to the lid so he doesn't pop out." "Will you help me hold it?" said the farmer. He went to the chest in which his wife had hidden the sexton, once frightened, now terrified. The farmer lifted the lid a little and peeped in. "Ho!" he sprang back. "I saw him. He's the image of our sexton. A horrible sight." After that, they needed another drink, wouldn't you? And they sat there drinking far into the night. "You must sell me your conjurer," said the farmer. "You can fix your own price. I'd pay you a bushel of money right away." "Oh, I couldn't do that," Little Claus said. Just think of how useful my conjurer is." "But I'd so like to have him." The farmer kept begging to buy it. "Well," said Little Claus, "you have been kind enough to me to give me a nice lodging, so I can't say no. You shall have my sack for a bushel of money, but it must be full to the brim." "You shall have it," said the farmer. "But you must take that chest along with you, too. I won't have it in the house for another hour. He might still be inside of it. You can never tell." So Little Claus sold his sack with the dry horsehide in it and was paid a bushel of money measured up to the brim. The farmer gave him the wheelbarrow, too, in which to wheel away the money and the chest. "Fare you well," said Little Claus, and off he went with his money and his chest and the sexton inside of it. On the further side of the forest was a deep, wide river, where the current ran so strong it was almost impossible to swim against it. A big new bridge had been built across the river, and when Little Claus came to the middle of it, he said very loud so the sexton could hear him, "Now, what would I do with this silly chest? It's heavy as a stone, and I'm too tired to wheel it any further, so I'll throw it in the river, and if it drifts down to my house, well and good, but if it sinks, I haven't lost much." Then he tilted up the chest a little, as if he were about to tip it into the river. "Stop! Don't!" the sexton shouted inside. "Let me get out first." "Oh," said Little Claus, pretending to be frightened. "Is he still there? Well, then I'd better throw him into the river and drown him." "Oh, no, don't do that to me," the sexton shouted. I'll give a bushel of money to get out of this." "Well, that's altogether different," said Little Claus, opening the chest. The sexton popped out at once, pushed the empty chest into the water, and hurried home to give Little Claus a bushel of money. What with the farmer's bushel and the sexton's bushel, Little Claus had a wheelbarrow quite full. "I've got a good price for my horse," he said when he got home and emptied all the money in a heap on the floor in his room. "How Big Claus will fret when he finds out that my one horse has made me so rich. But I won't tell him how I managed it." Then he sent a boy to borrow a bushel measure from Big Claus. "Whatever would he want with it?" Big Claus wondered, and smeared pitch on the bottom of the bushel so that a little of whatever he measured would stick to it. And so it happened that when he got his measure back, he found 3 newly minted pieces of silver stuck to it. "What's this?" Big Claus ran to see Little Claus. "Where did you get so much money?" "Ah, that's what I got for the horsehide I sold last night." "Heavens above, how the prices of hides have gone up!" Big Claus ran home, took an axe, and knocked out all 4 of his horses on the head. Then he ripped their hides off and set out to town with them. "Hides, hides, who'll buy hides?" he bawled up and down the streets. All the shoemakers and tanners came running to ask what his price was. "A bushel of money apiece," he told them. "Are you crazy?" they asked. "Do you think we spend money by the bushel?" "Hides, hides, who'll buy hides?" he kept shouting. And to those who asked how much, he said, "A bushel of money." "Take us for fools," they said. The shoemakers took their straps and their tans and their leather aprons, and they beat Big Claus through the town. "Hides, hides," they mocked him. "We'll tan your hide if you don't get out of town." Big Claus had to run as fast as he could. He had never been beaten so badly. "Little Claus will pay for this," he said when he got back home. "I'll kill him for it." Now it so happened that Little Claus's old grandmother had just died. She had been as cross could be. Never a kind word did she have for him, but he was sorry to see her die. He put the dead woman in his own warm bed, and just in case she came to life again, he let her lie there all night while he napped in the chair in the corner. What is happening in Copenhagen? As he had done so often before. As he sat there in the night, the door opened and Big Claus came in with an axe. He knew exactly where Little Claus's bed was, so he went straight to it and knocked the dead grandmother on the head, under the impression that she was Little Claus. "There," he said, "you won't fool me again." And then he went home. "What a wicked man," said Little Claus. "Why, he would have killed me. It's lucky for my grandmother that she was already dead, or he would have been the death of her." He dressed up his old grandmother in her Sunday best, borrowed his neighbor's horse, hitched up his cart, and on the back seat he propped up his grandmother, wedged in so the jolts would not topple her over, and away they went through the forest. When the sun came up, they drew abreast of a large inn, where Little Claus halted and went in to get some breakfast. The innkeeper was a wealthy man, and good enough fellow in his way, but his temper was fiery as if he were made of pepper and snuff. "Good morning." Oh, this is the other guy. "Good morning," he said to Little Claus. "You're up and dressed mighty early." "Yes," said Little Claus. "I am bound for the town with my old grandmother, who's sitting out there in the cart. I can't get her to come in, but you might take her a glass of mead. You'll have to shout at her to make her hear you, for she's deaf as a post." "I'll take it right out." The innkeeper poured a glass full of mead and took it to the dead grandmother, who sat stiffly on the cart. "Your grandson sent you a glass of mead," said the innkeeper. But the dead woman never said a word. She just sat there. Rude. "Don't you hear me?" the innkeeper shouted his loudest. "There's a glass of mead from your grandson." Time after time he shouted it. She didn't budge. He flew into such a rage that he threw the glass in her face. The mead spilled all over her as she fell backwards, for she was just propped up, not tied in place. "Confound it!" Little Claus rushed out the door and took the innkeeper by the throat. "You've gone and killed my grandmother. Look, there's a big hole in her forehead." "Oh, what a calamity!" The innkeeper wrung his hands. "And all because of my fiery temper. Dear Little Claus." When did he ever tell him his name? "I'll give you a bushel of money. I'll bury your grandmother as if she were my own. But you must hush this thing up for me, or they'll chop off my head. Oh, how I hate that." So it came about that Little Claus got another bushel of money, and the landlord buried the old grandmother as if she had been his own. Just as soon as Little Claus got home, he sent a boy to borrow a bushel measure from Big Claus. "Little Claus wants to borrow it. Didn't I kill him? I'll go and see about that." So Big Claus took the measure himself over to Little Claus. "Where did you get all that money?" he asked when he saw the height of the money pile. "When you killed my grandmother instead of me," Little Claus told him. "I sold her for a bushel of money." "Heavens above, that was indeed a good price," said Big Claus. He hurried home, took an axe, knocked his old grandmother on the head, and then put her in the cart, drove off to town, and asked the apothecary if he wanted to buy a dead body. This Big Claus man. "Whose dead body?" asked the apothecary. "Where'd you get it?" "It's my grandmother's dead body. I killed her for a bushel of money," Big Claus told him. "Lord," said the apothecary. "Man, you must be crazy. Don't talk like that, or they'll chop off your head." Then he told him straight that he had done a wicked deed, and that he was a terrible fellow, and that the worst punishment was too good for him. Big Claus got frightened. He jumped in his cart, whipped up the horses, and drove home as fast as they would take him. The apothecary and everyone else thought he must be a madman, so they didn't stand in his way. "I'll see that you pay for this," said Big Claus when he reached the high road. "Oh, won't I make you pay for this, Little Claus?" The moment he got home, he took the biggest sack he could find and went to see Little Claus and said, "You've deceived me again. First, I killed all 4 of my horses. Then, I killed my old grandmother, and it's your fault. But I'll make sure you don't fool me again." Then he caught Little Claus up and he put him in the sack, slung him over his back, and told him, "Now I shall take you and drown you." It was a long way to the river, and Little Claus was no light load. The road went by the church, and they passed, and they could hear the organ playing and the people singing very beautifully. Big Claus set down his sack just outside the church door. He thought the best thing for him to do was go in and hear a hymn before he went any further. Little Claus was tied securely in the sack, and all the people were inside the church. So Big Claus went inside too. "Oh dear," Little Claus sighed in the sack. Twist and turn as he might, he could not loosen the knot. When a white-haired old cattle driver came by, leaning heavily on his staff. The herd of bulls and cows he was driving bumped up against the sack that Little Claus was in, and he overturned it. "Oh dear," Little Claus sighed. "Oh, I'm so young to be going to heaven." "While I," said the cattle driver, "am too old for this earth, yet heaven will not send for me." "Open the sack," Little Claus shouted. "Get in and take my place, and you'll go straight to heaven." "That's where I want to be," said the driver, and he undid the sack. Little Claus jumped out at once. "You must look after my cattle," said the old man as he crawled in. As soon as Little Claus fastened the sack, he walked away from there with all of the bulls and cows. Presently, Big Claus came out of the church. He took the sack on his back and he found it light, for the old driver was no more than half as heavy as Little Claus. "How light my burden is, all because I've been listening to a hymn," said Big Claus. He went up on the deep, wide river and threw the sack with the old cattle driver into the water. "You'll never trick me again," Big Claus said, for he thought he had seen the last splash of Little Claus. He started home, but when he came to the crossroads, he met Little Claus and all his cattle. "Where did you come from?" Big Claus exclaimed. "Didn't I just drown you?" "Yes," said Little Claus. "You threw me into the river half an hour ago." "Then how did you come by such a fine herd of cattle?" Big Claus wanted to know. Oh, they're sea cattle," said Little Claus. "I'll tell you how I got them, because I'm obliged to you for drowning me. I'm a made man now. I can't begin to tell you how rich I am. But when I was in the sack, the wind whistling was in my ears as you dropped me off the bridge into the cold water, and I was frightened enough. I went straight to the bottom, but it didn't hurt me because of all the fine, soft grass down there. Someone opened the sack, and a beautiful maiden took my hand. Her clothes were white as snow, and she had a green wreath floating in her hair. She said, 'So you've come, Little Claus. Here's a herd of cattle for you, but they're just the beginning of my presents. A mile further up the road, another herd waits for you.' Then I saw that the river is a great highway for people who live in the sea. Down at the bottom of the river, they just walk and drove their cattle straight in from the sea to the land where the rivers end. The flowers down there are fragrant. The grass is fresh, and the fish flit by like birds down there. The people are fine, and so are the cattle that come grazing alongside the roadside." "Then why are you back so soon?" Big Claus asked. "If it's all so beautiful, I'd have stayed down there." "Well," said Little Claus, "I'm being particularly clever. You remember that I said the sea maiden told me to go up 1 mile the road and that I'd find another herd of cattle? By road, she meant river, for that's the only way she travels. But I know how the river twists and turns, and it seemed too roundabout a way of getting there. So by coming up on the land, I took a shortcut, and that saves me half a mile, so I can get my cattle that much sooner." "You are a lucky man," said Big Claus. Do you think I would get me some cattle too if I went down to the bottom of the river?" "Oh, I'm sure you would," said Little Claus. "Don't expect me to carry you there in a sack, though, because you're too heavy for me. But if you walk into the river and crawl into the sack, I'll throw you in with the greatest of pleasure." "Thank you," said Big Claus. But remember, if I don't get a herd of sea cattle down there, I'll give you a thrashing, believe you me." "Would you really?" said Little Claus. As they came to the river, the thirsty cattle saw the water and rushed to drink it. Little Claus said, "See what a hurry they are to get back to the bottom of the river?" "Help me get there first," Big Claus commanded, "or I'll give you that beating right now." He struggled into the big sack, for which had been lying across the back of one of the cattle. "Put a stone in, or I'm afraid I shan't sink," said Big Claus. "No fear of that," said Little Claus. He put a big stone in the sack, tied it tightly, and pushed it into the river. Splash! Up flew the water, and down to the bottom sank Big Claus. "I'm afraid he won't find what I found," said Little Claus, as he herded his cattle home. The end. Thanks for joining us for Storytime, friends. We were drinking Aries from the Cat and Kettle. Elliot's falling asleep. Felicity's falling asleep. It's time for bedtime. Good night.